I will start us off like usual, just doing the uh, refuge prayer and the four immeasurables. So see if I can share my screen. Should be this one. Yep. And then again, if if everyone could be sure that they're muted, and then I'll do this one time in English and 2 times in Tibetan. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. Sangye Shadam Soki Shognam La Jangshu Badu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Din Sogi Pesonam Ki Drola Penshir Sangye Druparsho Sangye Shadam Soki Shognam La Jangshu Badu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Din Sogi Pesonam Ki Drona penshir sangye druparsho. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. All right, so I'm actually going to speak a little bit on the four immeasurables today because I promised for 2 sessions now. I promised to talk about some of the the wholesome and positive and beneficial states of mind. It seems like I've been focusing on the afflictions and the tricky stuff, the troublemakers, as His Holiness calls them. But so I thought I'd make sure that before this course is over, we've also talked about some of the wholesome mental states. But yeah, so before we go into today's sessions, let's just also do a little bit of a short meditation to just calm the mind and focus our attention, arrive here in this very precious present moment. And yeah, and also first I need to drink some tea because there's something interesting going on with my voice. All right. Okay, so just find a comfortable position with your back straight. So we want to cultivate a sense of being awake and alert and vigilant. So the way we place our body can enhance that and embody that. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we are relaxed. That's one of the most important foundations of meditation, is to relax and be at ease and not tense up. So we allow the face to soften, allow the shoulders to drop. Just resting our hands where it feels comfortable. And then we can start by moving our attention to the body, becoming aware of being embodied. Just noticing this whole field of tactile sensations. There might be some discomfort, some tension. There might be sensations of ease, and all of this is welcome. We just pay attention to it. And specifically noticing the sensations associated with the breathing. You can rest your attention on the rhythm of the breath, like a piece of cork floating on the waves and just bobbing up and down as the waves move. Not trying to influence the breath in any way, just paying close attention as it moves in and out. And not relating to the mental idea of breathing or the label of breath. See if you can let go of any conceptual overlays and just play, pay close attention to the actual sensations of the breath. Our experience becomes much richer if we can pay attention to what is actually real and not just be stuck in the ideas in our minds. Notice the breath flowing, constantly changing. This in breath that you're taking right now has never happened before and will never happen again. It's unique and precious. And then release the focus on the breathing and allow your attention, your awareness to become open and broad, like taking a metaphorical backward step and observing the space of the mind, everything that is unfolding within that space. And notice that every moment of that unfolding is unique and fresh. Thoughts arising, memories, sounds, scents. So there are really only two things in contemplative practice and spiritual practice, and there are only two things in living a skillful life. And those two things are what is appearing right now and how do we relate to that. This is your experience in this moment. How do you meet that? How do you greet what it's like to actually be you? Okay, and then with that, we can um, end this short meditation and return our attention to the rest of this session. Um, yeah, so I thought starting out, wanted to just check if there's anything for those of you who was here for last week's session, or for that matter, any of the other ones in this series. See if there's anything that's come up, or any questions that come up, or observations, insights, anything. Just opening up for a little bit of um, input before we start today's session. Might also be that there are none. Okay, I will take that as uh, indication to just go ahead with today's session then. Yeah, so like I said, I wanted to touch on some of the wholesome mental qualities today, and I've chosen to do that in the form of the four measurables. So they're not completely mirrored in the 51 mental factors that um, we covered last time, but they're certainly all in there. So, but I like this presentation, so I thought we'd do that. And I have actually have a little slide for that, so I'm going to share that little PDF in the chat if I can find it. There we go. And I'll soon share that slide as well. Yeah, so that's the first part of today's session, and then I thought I'd just do a little recap of what we've actually been talking about, and then hopefully we'll have time for some meditation at the end and throughout some questions if something comes up. Yeah, so one of the things that I find really interesting with Buddhist psychology in general is that it has this precision and clarity to it. I was reminded of a little anecdote. This is, I guess, quite a number of years ago now, and this was back in Sweden, and I have a friend he was starting at Karolinska Institute, who's this a research institute in Stockholm. Maybe some of you have heard of it. So my friend, he was starting a research lab there, and the topic or the name of the lab would be the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research, which I thought that was really encouraging that they were going to start this center and start doing research on those specific topics. So I was having lunch with him, and so then I asked him what their definition of compassion was, like, because they were going to do all this research, and I thought it would be interesting to see what was like their working definition for compassion. And he just looked perplexed and said, well, I really I don't know, which I found was almost hilarious, since he was going to start a research institute on compassion. But so I went ahead and just shared the Buddhist definition for compassion, which is simply the wish uh, for someone not to suffer. So we see someone, they suffer, and the wish is generated for them to not suffer, and that wish in itself is compassion. And of course, it can also be then directed towards ourselves, of course, self-compassion. Um, but yeah, so and then I talked about love and some of the things that I will share here very soon. And then he also mentioned that the next day he was going to be interviewed on Swedish public radio. So I thought it would be interesting to tune into this interview. And the funny thing was that during the interview, the interviewer asked him, and not surprisingly, she asked him, "So what's compassion?" And the funny thing is that what he ended up doing was giving the Buddhist definition of compassion that we have talked about the very day before. So yeah, so just to shed some light on how, in a way, not very far Western psychology has come when it comes to a lot of these topics. I heard the Dalai Lama uh, very gently comment at one time that he felt that Western psychology may be sometimes a little bit primitive. So yeah, there's a lot of richness and depth in Buddhist psychology. And one of the things that I really appreciate is that there is this clarity of definition. There's no question about what love is, what compassion is, and so on. And that makes it easier for us to observe our minds and then kind of notice the things that are helpful and the ones that are not, and also understanding how they interact and how they come to arise in the mind. All right, so let me see if I can share this little slide of the four immeasurables. Where's my little, there's the share thingy. Let's see, and yeah, you should be able to see that now. So so these are called the four immeasurables. They're love, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, or equanimity, sometimes impartiality. I went with equanimity because it's the most common translation, I would say. And they're called immeasurables because they can be cultivated without limit. So there's like no limit to how much love can fill the mind potentially. And also there's no, in our current state, we tend to love just only certain people and we don't love others. And also our love can seem to be very conditioned. I won't love you if you don't treat me well, that kind of thing. But love can be cultivated so it becomes completely unconditional, extends to all beings, of course, including ourselves, but also including animals or whatever beings might be out there in the universe. So that's why these states are called immeasurables. And Traditional term for them is also Brahma Viharas, which means something like the place where the gods live, or what we might call heaven. So it means that to the extent that we can cultivate these, or to the extent that they can arise in our minds, that's also the extent to which we are in heaven in a very real sense. So heaven is not a place we can go to. It's actually a state of mind that we can actualize through training our minds and cultivating these beneficial mental states. Yeah, and again, so the first one on the list is love, sometimes called loving kindness. I also like to just talk about kindness sometimes because love is the charged word. But here, again, the definition is simply wishing someone to be happy, including wishing ourselves to be happy or anyone else. Um, and it's completely unconditional. It doesn't expect anything in return. It just goes one way. It's it's not I wish you to be happy if you do X, Y, and Z. It's simply I wish you to be happy. I wish everyone to be happy, and then cultivating that state of mind. And then, yeah, also on this list, you'll see I've included what's called the far enemy of these mind states and what's called the near enemy. So, the far enemy, that's always really obvious. So for example, for love, the far enemy is hatred. So this is the complete opposite of love. We can't in the same moment experience hate and love at the same time towards the same object. You know, we do talk about love-hate relationships, but from the perspective of Buddhist psychology, those two states cannot arise in the same moment directed towards the same object because they are completely contradictory. They are each other's absolute opposites, and hate destroys love. So that's the far enemy. And then we have what's called the near enemy of all of these four, and that's a bit more interesting because the near enemy can sometimes be mistaken for the real thing. So the near enemy of love is attachment, and sometimes we completely get those two confused, and unless we're enlightened, our love will always be mixed up with attachment, and always or often to a degree that we can't tell them apart. So attachment, that's the clinging, grasping that wants something, and that's, oftentimes romantic love can have certainly that aspect to it, that I expect you to make me happy, and if you do something I don't approve of, then my love will end, because now it flips into disgust or aversion or hatred. So whereas love is this completely open heart, attachment always expects something in return. And as a side note here, there's the term attachment is actually used in Western psychology, and there it means something completely different and something that is actually good and wholesome. In Western psychology, attachment simply means having a healthy connection, for example, to a caregiver or a parent. So there, it's more about trust and ease in how we relate to someone who we actually do love. So attachment in that sense is a good thing, but attachment from a Buddhist point of view is actually the root of all the misery we experience. So again, very important to define the words and be aware of what words we're using. Okay, so that's love, and then the next one is compassion, and compassion is defined as the wish for someone to be free of suffering. So in a sense, it's also what happens when love meets suffering. What arises is compassion and the wish for that person or animal to be free from their suffering. And to fully develop compassion, we must recognize and understand the suffering that we ourselves experience and the suffering that others experience. And this is also why there's a lot of emphasis in Buddhism on understanding suffering and the nuances of suffering and the different levels of suffering. And when Buddha presented his very initial teachings, he presented them as the Four Noble Truths, and the first truth is the truth of suffering. So just emphasizing how important it is to actually understand the nuances and depth of suffering so that we can, from that, develop compassion for ourselves and for others. And the far enemy of compassion, that's just cruelty. The wish to intentionally harm someone. And yeah, there's not so much to say about that, but again, the near enemy might be more interesting. The state of mind that masquerades as compassion, and that's pity, or you can also say that it's empathetic distress. So pity, that's just looking down on someone, feeling sorry for them from a place of superiority. So it's easy to feel compassion for the beggar, but it's maybe not, true compassion. It's just pity, for them, but so good that I'm not them, and I'm, actually there's somewhere in the back of the mind we do feel superior and better than the person that we have pity for. And then empathetic distress, that's getting caught in the pain or the suffering itself. So if we see someone who's suffering, we get the initial reaction to that is actually pain. So we feel that suffering ourselves, but then it's easy to get stuck in that and paralyzed by it. So there's something called compassion fatigue, where nurses and doctors and psychologists and so on, they are said to be suffering from compassion fatigue, where they burn out because they have to care about people all day long. But and now I'm going on off on a tangent here, but there's been some really interesting research showing that that's not actually compassion. Whoa, and my camera just decided to do something on its own. Hold on, I'm just gonna zoom back out. Uh, there we go. Okay, stop that. So my camera's got this weird AI thing. So when I do a certain sign with my hand, it does something. So I I waved with my hand, and the camera decided to zoom in. Sorry about that. Yeah, so empathetic distress is getting caught on this level of recognizing someone's suffering, but then not moving on to compassion, which is a much more empowered um, and not draining state of mind. So it's easy to think that, again, it's a compassion that's fatiguing us, but it's actually not. It's more akin to, again, to attachment, or yeah, getting caught and absorbed with the suffering rather than transforming it and moving on into actual compassion. So a tricky thing. Yeah, I'll since I my camera made me kind of lose my train of thought anyway, so I think I'll just pause here for a second and see if this makes sense so far, or if there are any questions about either this presentation of love, compassion, or their far or near enemies.
Yeah, Martin, I have a question, just around the empathic distress. Um, is that different from empathy? And what's the difference between empathy and compassion?
Yeah, so again, um, the words are defined differently, and you have to make sure what someone really means when they say empathy. And in Buddhism per se, the word empathy isn't really there. Um, so it's not really used, but so in my experience, um, empathy in psychology and other Western traditions is kind of used interchangeably with something like care or compassion. But I do think that um, yeah, because empathy again, it means feeling the suffering of someone else or tuning into that. And there's something that's called empathetic distress. So yeah, so I think that maybe you could say if there is only empathy, you're in trouble because that will drain you, and it's not a nice state to live your life in. But it can be that spark of compassion. You know, you need empathy, you need that resonance to understand the pain. But if you don't move on from empathy, then it's not going to be very empowering and helpful. So, but that's just my take on the word. If you ask someone else, they might say something very different. But yeah, what's your sense of the word empathy from that perspective?
Well, I struggle with it. I just have gone through some hospice training to be a community visiting volunteer. And so they always bring up, being having an empathic ear and having
Mm,
empathy and listening with empathy and all this kind of stuff. And of course, then, I've got the Buddha's side of it where I'm more compassion. So I sometimes think just from what you were saying, that empathy, sort of kicks it off,
mm.
sort of empathizing with someone who's suffering. But then moving into compassion, is that more action? Like I want to be able to do something to make it better?
Yeah, I mean, um, there's that engaged aspect of compassion. So yeah, like yeah, this is reality. So now what can we do? And that can
Okay.
be a much more optimistic stance. Yes, we recognize suffering, but there's no point in being bogged down with that, or make it into this horrible, unworkable thing. But rather, so what can we do? And if there's nothing we can do, then there's only acceptance. Um, so that's so it's kind of bringing wisdom, I guess, and clarity to it. Um, and in a sense also like zooming out and having this more wide open, spacious place to hold that suffering in. Um, that would be more compassion, I would say.
Yeah, and I would think there's always something that can be done about it, even if it's helping the individual see their situation from a different point of view.
Yeah,
Can't change their situation, but maybe help them change their perspective on it.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, and it's interesting. I've noticed with the clients I see um, as a psychologist, one of the most helpful things it seems that I can ever say to people, and I've had so many examples of this, is that tell them that, if there's if the situation is unsatisfactory, there's something we don't like about the situation. There are always three options. So the one option is we can change the situation potentially. Maybe there's something we can do. Um, or we can leave the situation potentially. So this might be, they might be have a terrible work situation or whatever. So yeah, can we change it? Maybe. Can we leave it? Maybe. But if we can't, or if we decide not to change it or leave it, then there's only one option remaining, and that's acceptance. And there are only those three that make sense. Um, but we try others like moan about it or complain about it or get upset about it, but none of that's helpful. So for some reason, just putting it very clearly like that, I find has helped a lot of my clients, because we get so stuck in our suffering and it gets so unworkable, and um, we tend to also end up in a debilitating victim mentality a lot of times. But yeah, and having said that, acceptance is really tricky and not an easy thing to do, but it's actually the only sensible option in that situation.
Meaning learning, trying to see it from a different perspective, like
Yeah, and just
it's the only way to accept it,
not fighting with it,
right?
not fighting with that which is actually inevitable. That only drains our energy. It just layers, more and more layers of suffering on top of something that was already bad. So it's yeah, so it's and then that's where you come into things like self-compassion or renunciation, or the ability to just observe things as they are, and so on and so forth. So that simple word acceptance, which is really not there in Buddhism either, but it kind of branches out to a lot of things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. That's I agree that your questions are very good. Hmm. Okay, so yeah, so that was love and compassion, and then we have the next one on the list is sympathetic joy, sometimes simply called rejoicing. But I've noticed that the word rejoicing has some unfortunate like religious connotations. I have a friend here who grew up in a Catholic background, and she's repulsed by the word rejoicing. So I don't know. I personally I love the word rejoicing. I think it's a beautiful thing to do. But anyways, sympathetic joy. It's simply the ability to um, take delight in someone else's happiness or good fortune. So being really happy when good things happen to other people, but oftentimes we are not. So instead, we maybe get jealous, and this is then the far enemy of rejoicing or sympathetic joy. So Venerable Brina has called jealousy the stupidest affliction, because it's a situation in a situation where we could be feeling joy. For example, you know, if this person wins the lottery, and we could truly rejoice in that. We could be so happy for them. But instead, why didn't I win the lottery? And now jealousy arises, and jealousy is causing us pain. So the situation is what it is, but it either causes joy and delight and happiness, or the very same thing that happens causes jealousy and envy and lots of mental suffering for us. So I find that to be really, really um, interesting, how we can go one way or the other. And then, of course, the near enemy of sympathetic joy or rejoicing, it's um, hypocrisy or affectation, where we just, we try to muster some, at least pretend that we're happy for someone. Yeah, good for you. So, but sometimes uh, they're close enough that we mix them up and mistake the real thing for that near enemy. Um, and then the final one, that's equanimity, or like I said, sometimes translated as impartiality. So it's on the list. It often comes last, but it might actually be the most important one of all of them, because it said that if we don't have this one, if we don't have equanimity, it's actually impossible to cultivate the other three, or at least impossible for them to grow beyond a certain limit. So the definition of equanimity is having a mind that's undisturbed by attachment or anger, and free from this unbalance of holding some dear and others distant. So we have this tendency to group people into enemies, friends, and strangers. So, or enemies, like difficult people. So our enemies, those are the people who have done something to upset us and we don't like them. The friends, they're the people who have, done something nice for us and we tend to like them. And then the strangers are the rest of everyone, and we couldn't really, couldn't care less what happens to them. But equanimity is about actually seeing that from the perspective of everyone else, that person or that animal for that matter, all they want is to be happy and they don't want to suffer. And it's true for everyone. It's true for the person we call enemy. It's true for the person we call friend. It's true for the person we call stranger. And so those categories are simply conceptual constructs in our minds, and they are actually very detrimental and limiting constructs, because they prevent us from seeing reality clearly, and they prevent us from relating um, to other sentient beings in an open and caring and compassionate way. So we need to start by cultivating equanimity, in the sense that we kind of tear down those walls between the people that are dear to us and the people we don't care about and the people that we even might despise. Um, so the far enemy is this anxiety and worry that comes from dividing people into good and bad, basically. Um, and yeah, it's also difficult to feel love for a difficult person, like our horrible boss or some politician that we really dislike. And it's easy to feel compassion for someone, like I said, in a low position, like an abused animal in captivity. That's easy to feel compassion for them, but it's very difficult to feel compassion for maybe someone who's rich and powerful, like, the Donald Trumps of the world. That's not, for many people, it's not compassion that arises, because we can't recognize their suffering even. And it's easy to find joy when a dear friend finds some success, but when our worst enemy finds the same kind of success, that doesn't make us happy at all. Um, yeah, and then the near enemy of equanimity, that is indifference, so not caring. And unfortunately, it's very easy to mistake what's actually a balanced, impartial mind with a mind that's simply detached and lacking in caring. So it's easy to kind of end up with this like simulated holiness almost, as when people get into spiritual practice, it's easy to get very holy very fast. Like one of my teachers said, too holy too soon. But so there's like this holiness in air quotes that comes from simply being indifferent. So we're just I'm above everything. I'm very calm, and that's not equanimity at all. It's just is a very destructive state of mind that's going to lead us nowhere. Um, but it's easy to fall into that trap. Um, yeah, and then I thought I would also mention, because there's an interesting way how these four love, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, how they can be kind of used as the antidote to each other's near enemies. So, for example, like I said, the near enemy of compassion is pity. So if we if we notice that pity is arising in our minds, the antidote to that can be cultivating love. So again, so this cultivating this wish for others to be happy, and there are meditations like loving kindness meditation, for example, to do this cultivation. But if we do that, that can help us counteract pity because we're now focusing on the positive potential and well-being of others rather than merely just feeling sorry for them. So this shift that love gives encourages seeing others as capable and deserving of happiness rather than, simply objects of our, sorrow and empathy. And then conversely, so the near enemy of love, like I said, is attachment. So we can, to counteract attachment, we can employ compassion. So yeah, with compassion or this wish for them to be free of suffering, it can counteract attachment by promoting a more selfless and unconditional care, you might say. So attachment often involves this possessive, clinging quality, whereas compassion is more about a genuine concern for others' well-being without self-interest. And again, it has this more open quality to it. So in that way, compassion can counteract pity, or sorry, love can counteract pity, and compassion can counteract attachment. And then similarly with sympathetic joy and equanimity. So if we notice that there is this indifference rather than equanimity in our minds, then we can employ sympathetic joy, or this happiness for others, or this, rejoicing in others' happiness and success. That can counteract indifference by encouraging like a more active and engaged emotional response to others. So indifference might involve detachment, or this uncaring attitude, but sympathetic joy really fosters a warm, connected, and I don't know, celebratory engagement with others' positive experiences, and really bringing emphasis to the positive experience and the good qualities of others to counteract indifference and an uncaring attitude. And then um, equanimity finally can counteract the hypocrisy or affectation that is the near enemy of sympathetic joy. So equanimity involves this capacity to remain balanced and unbiased in the face of all the vicissitudes, the pleasure and pain of life. So it can counteract hypocrisy by promoting can say more authenticity and a genuine sense of equality. So equanimity can actually help us seeing others' happiness without the need to project our own joy or approval, or project our own anything onto the happiness of others. Just allowing for a more honest and balanced response to the happiness that someone else is experiencing, and thus counteracting the hypocrisy of just pretending in the midst of all these projections onto someone else's experience. Yeah, so that's a very brief. I'm starting to think maybe I was too ambitious, trying to go through all of the um, four measurables with their respective far and near enemies. But yeah, I felt that at least I wanted to give the introduction to them. And again, like so many things, like I said before, we could have another course on each and every one of those. But I thought I would just um, give the overview at least. Yeah, so that's a high speed tour through the four measurables. Anything that, yeah, came up during that, or any questions? Um, um,
Actually, I have a question. What's a good source to maybe continue working with this, maybe in foreign measurables? Recommendations?
um, there is a very, very good book. Let me just see what it's called. So I get that, just so I get the title right. Okay, it's actually, oh, I thought it had a different titles, but there's a book by Alan Wallace called The Four Measurables, Practices to Open the Heart. So that's a really a good place to start. I can post that in the chat if I can find it. There we go. Um, yeah, and I personally I find it to be a really um, practicing these, and there are meditations that go along with each of these to cultivate them. There's compassion meditation and loving kindness meditation and so on. You can meditate on equanimity and impartiality, and I wish we could go more into that, but yeah, it kind of um, yeah, I find that it's something that really softens the mind and makes it receptible to a lot of the other um, practices. And I find that by practicing the four immeasurables, I also find myself being more receptive to some of the more, you know, heady philosophical aspects, maybe. So yeah, it kind of moistens the mind so that the seeds that we're trying to plant can actually take root and flourish in a sense. Um, um, yeah, I don't know. Does someone have experience of practicing these four or implementing them in their lives?
Um, I've been practicing the equanimity one a lot because I was a raving political activist for a lot of my earlier adult life, and that involves a lot of you're wrong, I'm right.
Hmm.
I hate you for doing this. And just, I used to pride myself on being an angry young woman. And it was actually something Venerable Rabina said that really kind of turned my head around and got me pointed in the right direction was like using someone like a Donald Trump, who clearly is, not your warm and fuzzy type. But at the same time, to generate compassion for him, I think about what his mind, the state of his mind must be like.
Mm.
and that how he must be suffering inside himself to project so much negativity. And
Mm.
so I kind of do that with people that I really find myself disliking and doing that whole, they want to be happy and they don't want to suffer, but the state of their mind is pretty must cause them a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to have that state of mind kind of thing. So I sort of work with it in that way.
Yeah. No, that sounds really good. I actually just the other day it just hit me, and this was it hit me kind of hard because I realized that I've never seen uh, Donald Trump laugh or even smile ever. Um, yeah, it actually, yeah, it just makes me very sad too, uh, to even imagine that. Yeah, it's very sad. That's all I can say. And if we realize that and take that in fully, then maybe there is some way that we can actually develop some compassion and concern even for those people who seem so impossible to love or care for or wish well. Um, yeah, I also never seen Melania Trump laugh or smile or Don Jr. or
Yeah, none
yeah,
of them.
any of them, none of them.
Yeah,
It's terrible.
really, really sad people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. And
I'm just going to
I see a
volunteer.
race.
Yeah,
Um,
that's.
yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to volunteer the technique that I had success with regards to Donald Trump. Lauren, I have kind of a similar background, very much into social action, social justice. I imagine what he looked like as a baby and how I would have felt toward him, right? And that automatic response of kind of feeling gentle and love. And then just realizing that, things did whatever, life did whatever it did to him. And he turned out in the end like he has.
Mm.
But I can still remember what he looks like as a baby and feel an openness toward him. And that's how, basically, it's therapy for me. And it's worked for me.
Mm. Yeah, and it's um, Shantideva teaches that we shouldn't get angry um, with the person who does bad things. We should get angry with if there's any room for anger, then we should get angry with the afflictions that control them. So it is the delusion and the anger and the attachment that is in you know Donald Trump's minds and everyone's minds. That is what's causing us to act in ways that are detrimental to ourselves and others. Um, and yeah, so I'll let that be um, segue into the other thing I thought I would do in this session, which is actually a little bit of recap of what we've covered. So um, we started out with this recognition that according to Buddhism, everything that we experience um, comes from the mind. So it's so important to study and understand the mind as it is the very source of happiness and suffering. And we exemplify this with the two opening verses of the Dhammapada, and I'll just read them again here. The Buddha says in the Dhammapada, mind is the chief forerunner of all evil states. Experiences are led by and produced chiefly by the mind. If one speaks or acts with a corrupted, impure mind, suffering will follow just like the wheel of an ox cart when the ox pulls. And then conversely, mind is the chief forerunner of all good states. Experiences are led by and produced by the mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness will follow along, just like one's shadow that never departs. So there's no point in looking anywhere else but the mind for the sources of happiness and suffering. And there's also ultimately no other place where it can be transformed. You know, we can rearrange the outer world as much as we want. We can move to a different city. We can get a new partner. We can get the latest iPhone. We can, we can so on and so forth. And it's never going to satisfy us. It's never going to allow us to find genuine, stable, lasting happiness or contentment or joy. The only place we can do that work is in the mind. So that's what Buddhism is about, that and nothing else, really. And then we talked about the definition of mind or consciousness. We had those two aspects of clear and knowing, where clear refers to this capacity for things to arise in the mind, almost like you can say like mental holograms or reflections in the mirror. And these are all the things all the appearances that arise in the mind. Things like sights and smells and sounds, but also memories and impulses and ideas and thoughts and so on. So that's the clear aspect. And then the knowing aspect, that's the capacity of the mind to be cognizant or aware of that which arises. We can know it. And in meditation specifically, we can refer to our mind as this aware space, the space of the mind where everything we'll ever experience that happened within that space. Then we talked about how the mind is affected by constructive and destructive states. So we talked about afflictions that sometimes translate as destructive emotions, but emotion doesn't really cover the whole range of what an affliction is. But we talked about how the afflictions are always rooted in distorted cognition and and a misapprehension of reality. So they therefore lead to inappropriate reactions that contribute to our own and other suffering. And afflictions, as they arise, they also have this quality of disturbing the mind. The natural peace and calm and contentment in the mind is disturbed because of attachment. And we talked about the three root poisons, or the three main afflictions, which are greed, attachment, anger, hatred, and ignorance, delusion. And again, the confusion, the delusion is the root of all of them. Everything arises from our inability to see things clearly and a lack of wisdom. And then conversely, we have the constructive mental states, some of which we talked about. 4 of them we talked about today. And so interestingly, those are all based in a appropriate perception of reality. They're based in reality itself. So they're also then conducive to our own and others' happiness. So it's quite stunning, really, to realize that if my mind is disturbed, that's always because I'm confused about how things actually are at whatever deeper and deeper level, I'm not seeing things clearly. That's why there is anger or smugness or jealousy or malice or discontent, or whatever it is. It's based in a misapprehension of reality. And conversely, to the extent that there is love and generosity and kindness and warmth and open-heartedness, that's always based in a correct view of reality, correct perception of reality. And those things go deeper and deeper and deeper, and they're layers and layers and layers. And we talked about like the three then main wholesome states of mind. We talked about non-attachment or renunciation, non-hatred, loving kindness, and non-ignorance or wisdom. Yeah, and then we spent one session looking at this model of the 6 main minds, the sensory perceptions, the ear, eye, nose, tongue, body perceptions, and then the faculty of mental perception, of perceiving things like thoughts, for example, these 6 primary or main minds, which are just streams of data, basically, that then are accompanied by those 51 mental factors. So we looked at how different functions of the mind are associated with each moment of consciousness, depending on causes and conditions that are present. And of course, the idea of doing that is to realize that our mind is never stuck forever with any particular factor. It's always changing, and it's always arising out of causes and conditions. So by learning how they arise, we can vary the conditions, and we can transform our afflictions and so on, and therefore change the state of our minds for the better. So that's the work of being your own therapist, as Lama Yeshe said, to understand what's going on in the mind, and then watering the seeds that are wholesome, and then transforming or purifying the seeds that are not wholesome. That's the, I was going to say day-to-day work, but it's like the microsecond to microsecond work of being a practitioner, to seeing those things more clearly, and then finding ways to work with them, and deepening the clarity with which we can approach our own experience, and understand what's actually, what the hell's going on. Yeah, so that's what we've been up to for these 4 sessions. Yeah, I wish we had a few more so we could delve into some of these things at a greater detail, but I hope I've managed to some degree to convey something useful, and that you've at least have some ideas about where to start to, some threads to start pull at, and see where it takes you. And I will pause again and just see if there are any final comments or questions or insights that you'd like to share before we go into the concluding meditation. Yeah, how's the course been? Have you derived some benefit? Was there something useful in there?
I'm enjoying it, especially listening to you all speaking. I'm getting something out of it. Thank you.
I'm happy to hear that.
I
I'm
really
getting
enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I should have raised my hand. Martin, this has been a fabulous class. I was going to ask Venerable Lobsang if he could try to hook up some more classes in the future. Really enjoyed these. Thank you so much.
I have really enjoyed this class. It's been very useful to me. One thing in particular, just among all the notes I took, is that's useful is ask what is arising in our mind now and then, like maybe when we're thinking of another person and an emotion comes to mind. What is behind our feeling that emotion? Is it smugness, pride? What is it? What's going on there? So that was a very useful thought to me. Also, the discussion you had with Laura about the difference between empathy and pity. I never really thought about that, but it's helpful to think about it because empathy is close to compassion in that you have to be able to empathize, put yourself in the other person's place, but compassion develops it to a higher state, like you take it more seriously, perhaps, or you want to try to help the person in some way rather than just notice, oh, yeah, I felt that way too. And then go back to your current state of separateness from it. Anyway, yeah, so it's been a great class. Thank you very much, Martin. Really
Thank
liked it.
you. Yeah.
One of my
Donna,
friends said
was
to me once, he said, um, pity is cruel. And that really stuck with me, that pity is cruel. Um, I don't know if anyone else gets anything out of it, but it meant something to me.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it is cruel because it's like you're looking down. There's a
It
big
is, it's
sharp
kind of
line
as condescending.
between you and the person you pity.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think pity too could maybe be touched with it's your fault. Like, if you had, lived your life differently, you wouldn't have ended up like this kind of thing. It's that kind of blaming stuff as well.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I've really enjoyed teaching this course, and it's good to see that I haven't wasted everyone's time. So that's fabulous, and it's actually quite a privilege to be able to teach because it necessitates me thinking things through, maybe in a way that I wouldn't have if I didn't have the opportunity to do this. So it's been really, really helpful for myself as well. And thank you for joining, and thank you for all the wonderful questions and comments and engagement. It's been really lovely. So let's end all of this with a final meditation. So again, just slotting into a comfortable posture that is conducive to wakefulness and presence. And one of the things that is really cool about being a contemplative or a meditator is that we get to observe what might be the most amazing and fascinating phenomena there is, which is the mind. And if we can bring that kind of curiosity and willingness to connect and be open towards our own experience, it can be extremely interesting and fulfilling, not to say transforming. So I find it's always helpful to start any meditation by allowing the attention to just drop down into the body, like pouring water into a glass, becoming aware of tactile sensations, like perhaps the pressure between the buttocks and this chair you're sitting on, just tuning into that sense of groundedness and stability of being carried. Or noticing the breathing and perhaps exploring the edges of where you can feel sensations from the breath. For example, can you feel the movement of the breathing in the back? Can you feel the movement of the breath from almost all the way up into the shoulders? Can you feel the physical sensations associated with the breath all the way down in the pelvis? So paying attention to physical sensations tends to ground us. It tends to often foster some relaxation. And it's like an anchor keeping us in the present moment. And then, just like we did before, I'll invite you to now allow your awareness to become open, broad, panoramic. So just gently paying attention to everything that arises in the mind. Like lying in the grass and watching a clear blue open sky and seeing the clouds that appear. that move, that disappear. Watching thoughts, emotions, sounds, memories, mental factors. And it's like someone who's not very familiar with different kinds of animals going to the zoo. Can be quite scary and intimidating, with quite confusing. But if biologist comes to the zoo, they know that, this is that kind of animal and they behave in this way. These are their specific traits. So it's not confusing at all. It's interesting and easy to make sense of. So you're now encountering the zoo of your own mind. And the first step to becoming an expert of your own mind is to simply observe whatever arises, greeting it with curiosity, openness, interest, and warmth. And then finally, I'll invite you to take yet another metaphorical backward step and see if you can become aware of that knowing quality. So in the mind, there are many objects to be known. See if you can move your attention from those to the very knowing itself. Noticing that quality of awareness, or cognizing, or knowing. And if you can get a sense for that, see if you can rest there for a few moments. Resting in that knowing quality itself. And this is something I would encourage you to incorporate into daily life. So if you every now and then can just pause and release the mental objects themselves, all the things going on in your mind, if you can gently release them and then rest in this knowing itself, rest in awareness itself. Noticing the space rather than the content of that space. Okay, and then with that, we can end this meditation and return our attention to the one remaining minute of this course. Yeah, so I'll just say thank you again, and we can dedicate whatever positive energy was generated throughout this course with the contemplation, the discussion, the meditation. May that transform into our own awakening. May it move us quickly along the path to enlightenment and the realization of all the good qualities. And may that also then allow us to be a real, genuine, true benefit to others so that we can help them on their own journey towards awakening. May it help limit our own suffering and others' suffering. May it contribute to real happiness, contentment, joy, fulfillment, and just radiant clarity, wisdom in our own minds and other minds. And yeah, with that, again, I'll say thank you, and I hope I'll see you around for maybe a next course down the road. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Mark.